She thought the first date was a prank, until the billionaire knelt down and said, "Marry me?" It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. The golden glow of the late sun poured through the tall glass windows of the cafe, casting soft light over the worn wooden floors. The air carried the scent of freshly ground coffee, and a smooth jazz tune played gently in the background, wrapping the space in a kind of calm that felt almost sacred. At a corner table by the window, Emily sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore a white dress, simple but tasteful. The fabric swayed slightly as she shifted in her seat, brushing softly against her knees. Her long blonde hair was curled at the ends, and her lips held a touch of pale rose. She had spent nearly an hour getting ready that morning, carefully choosing this look, polished, but not trying too hard. She glanced at her phone for the 5th time in 3 minutes. Still nothing. A small bouquet of daisies rested on the seat beside her. She had bought it on her way to the cafe, telling herself it was for decoration, but deep down she knew, if the date never showed up, at least she could walk home with something beautiful, a gift to herself. A reminder that she mattered, even if just to herself. Emily inhaled slowly, her fingers brushing the ceramic mug in front of her. Her latte had long since gone cold. She glanced at the door again. Her heart jumped as it opened. 5 guys strolled in, loud, laughing, the kind of energy that didn't belong in a quiet cafe. Her breath caught when she recognized one of them, Lance. He looked just like his profile pictures, clean-cut, confident, charmingly casual in a fitted navy sweater and dark jeans. He spotted her immediately, and for a split second, Emily's heart fluttered. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. It wasn't nervous or shy or sweet. It was smug. "That's her, right?" one of the guys said a little too loudly, elbowing Lance with a grin. "The Cinderella chick you were talking about?" Another one chuckled, pulling out his phone. "Yup, perfect lighting in here too. This'll go viral." Emily's heart sank. Her back stiffened, but she stayed frozen in her chair, her eyes flicking between them. Lance leaned back, stretching his arms arrogantly as he slid into the seat across from her. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how she was. Instead, he tossed his phone on the table and looked her over like she was some kind of science project. "I told them it'd be easy," he said, loud enough for the whole cafe to hear. "Poor girls fall the hardest. All it takes is a few sweet texts and a fake interest in their little sob stories. They eat it up." One of his friends cackled. Another aimed the phone at her, recording. Emily sat still, her face drained of color. The jazz music, once soft and comforting, now felt like a mockery, a lonely soundtrack to the worst moment of her week, maybe even her year. Lance leaned closer, his voice dripping with contempt. "You thought this was real? That some guy would actually want to date a barista from Queens? Please." He laughed, and the others joined in, high-fiving across the table. The words hit her like ice water. Her cheeks burned, not from shame, but from rage and something deeper. Disbelief. The kind that makes your throat ache and your lungs stop working. Her dream of meeting someone kind, someone real, had collapsed in a single, cruel joke. Emily didn't say a word. Her smile was gone, and the latte had gone completely cold. Lance's laughter echoed through the cafe, cruel and shrill. One of his friends leaned across the table sneering, "Hey, Cinderella, you gonna cry now?" Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. She could taste salt at the back of her throat, humiliation burning hot beneath her skin. Without a word, she grabbed her untouched latte and flung it straight at Lance's chest. The liquid splashed across his designer sweater. The cafe went silent. No one moved. Then came the hiss of anger. Lance shot up, his chair scraping the floor. "You think you can do that, you broke little?" one growled, stepping toward her, fists clenched. Emily's chair scraped back as she took a step away. The customers nearby froze, glancing nervously, but no one interfered. The door swung open with a sharp chime. A man entered, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the calm authority of someone who never needed to raise his voice. His gray suit was perfectly tailored, his expression composed yet unreadable. Even in the low golden light, his presence shifted the air. He didn't rush, he simply walked toward them, each step deliberate, heavy with quiet command. "Enough," he said, voice low, but cutting through the tension like a blade. The group turned. Lance's friend froze mid-step. "She said she doesn't like your joke," the man continued, tone cool and controlled. "Wasn't that clear enough?" The man who'd threatened Emily laughed nervously. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" The stranger slipped a black wallet from his pocket, opened it, and held up a sleek card embossed with silver letters. "Nathaniel Grant," he said evenly. "CEO, Foresight Group." The name hung in the air. Even the background jazz seemed to pause. The cafe owner straightened instantly. "Mr. Grant, sir, my apologies," he stammered. "These young men were just leaving." "Leaving?" Nathaniel's tone stayed calm, eyes sharp. "No, they're being escorted out." He gestured toward the door. The barista hurried forward, and within seconds, the group stumbled out in muttered curses, their arrogance gone. When the door closed behind them, the tension broke like glass. Nathaniel turned to Emily. She stood motionless by the window, shoulders trembling. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the half-empty mug. Her breathing came unevenly, chest rising and falling as if the room itself had shrunk. She wasn't crying from fear or anger. Her tears came from somewhere deeper, the place where hope had lived before being crushed again. Nathaniel noticed. His gaze softened. He said nothing, only took a folded handkerchief, white linen, crisp, and placed it quietly near her trembling hand. Emily blinked, startled, then turned away, wiping her eyes before the tears could fall. Around them, the cafe slowly returned to its rhythm, the quiet hum of voices, the faint clinking of cups. But to Emily, the world still felt blurred at the edges. Nathaniel's voice came gently, low enough for only her to hear. "Are you all right?" She didn't answer. Her lips quivered, trying to form words that wouldn't come. For the first time that day, she felt completely seen, and that realization hurt almost as much as what had just happened, because it reminded her how broken her faith in people had become, and how desperately she wished it wasn't. Nathaniel remained standing for a moment, giving Emily space. The cafe had returned to its normal pace, but everything around her still felt muted, like sound underwater. Her hands were clasped in her lap, knuckles pale, jaw clenched tight to keep herself from shaking. Without a word, Nathaniel pulled out the chair opposite hers and sat down, slowly, deliberately, not as a stranger intruding, but as someone anchoring her back into the world. From the inside pocket of his blazer, he removed a neatly folded white handkerchief. He didn't hand it to her. Instead, he placed it gently on the table, slid it just close enough for her to reach, and then rested his own hands loosely on the table surface, giving her silence instead of questions. That silence spoke more than any words could. Emily blinked at the handkerchief, then back at him. He was watching her, but not with pity. There was no gloating, no awkwardness, only quiet concern. Her composure cracked. She tried to speak, but her breath caught, her chest hitching with the first sob that slipped out before she could swallow it down. She brought her hand to her mouth, shoulders trembling. The tears followed quickly, unstoppable, hot and heavy, the kind that had been waiting far too long. She turned her face slightly toward the window, ashamed of falling apart in front of a stranger. "I am not crying because of them," she whispered, her voice raw and uneven. "I am crying because I actually believed. I still believed that someone might care enough to stay." Nathaniel didn't interrupt. He didn't fill the silence with platitudes or advice. He only listened, his eyes steady on her, not flinching away from her grief, but holding space for it. Emily wiped her eyes, breathing shakily. I thought I had learned. I thought I was done being that girl who waited at cafes with flowers in her lap, hoping today would be different. She let out a dry laugh that cracked halfway through. Guess I am still that girl. Nathaniel leaned slightly forward, not intruding but grounding the moment. He reached for his cup of untouched tea, stood up for a brief second, and returned with a fresh cup of chamomile tea. He placed it in front of her without a word. She looked at it, confused, then slowly glanced up. I thought you might need something warm, he said softly. Chamomile helps. Or so they tell me. Emily stared at him, her eyes red, lips trembling. You don't have to sit with me, she said. I know, he replied, but I'd like to. Her hands curled around the warmth of the teacup. It was the first thing that didn't feel cold today. They sat in silence, letting the moment breathe. After a while, Nathaniel spoke again, quietly, as if not to shatter what was slowly forming between them. You're not wrong to hope someone might care. You're not wrong to believe you deserve love. Emily looked down. You still do, he said. You just didn't meet someone who saw it yet. That's not your fault. She didn't reply immediately, but her fingers tightened around the cup. Then, with a tired sigh, she said, Today was supposed to be something, a start, but now I just want to forget it happened. Nathaniel nodded slowly. Then let's not end it here. She raised an eyebrow, eyes guarded. I'm not asking for a second date, he clarified with a small smile. Just dinner. Two strangers who had a really bad day, trying to make the rest of it a little less awful. Emily studied him, uncertain. But something in his voice, his calmness, his refusal to push, chipped away at her fear. After a pause, she said softly, Okay. But no flowers, no small talk, and no pretending to like jazz. He chuckled quietly. Deal, though I do have a weakness for lasagna. Hope that's not a deal breaker. A faint smile curved her lips for the first time that day. Not a full one, but real. And that was enough for now. The Italian restaurant Nathaniel chose was tucked away on a quiet street just a few blocks from the cafe. Its windows glowed warmly under strings of soft golden lights, and the scent of garlic and fresh herbs drifted into the night air. Emily hesitated on the sidewalk. This looks nice, she said quietly, unsure if she was dressed appropriately, unsure of everything. Nathaniel gave a small smile. It's my favorite kind of place. Good food. No need to pretend anything. Inside, the ambiance was cozy, not extravagant. Wooden tables, brick walls, flickering candlelight on each table. The hostess greeted Nathaniel with a knowing nod and led them to a quiet booth near the back. No one stared, no one whispered. It was a place where two people could simply be. When the menus arrived, Nathaniel slid his to the side without opening it and gently pushed Emily's toward her. You pick, he said casually. Pick for both of us. I have a terrible habit of ordering the one thing I end up regretting. Emily blinked at him, surprised. You trust me with your dinner? He shrugged playfully. I figure you've had better instincts than me today. She gave a soft chuckle, small, but real. Something in her shoulders eased. As they waited for the food, conversation slowly unfurled. At first, it was safe. Favorite foods, places they'd never traveled, what books were currently sitting unfinished on their nightstands. But gradually, the layers began to peel away. Emily told him about growing up in Queens with her mother, how her father had died in an accident when she was 10. How her mother had been battling a chronic illness for years now, and how Emily worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on and afford her evening design classes. It's like, the harder I try, the less anyone sees me, she said, fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. I'm either the poor girl with a dream or the charity case. No one asks what I actually want. Nathaniel didn't interrupt. He simply watched her, listening, not just to the words, but to the pain behind them. She spoke of a previous relationship, a man who had seemed perfect until he found out about her situation, then vanished, left with only silence and a bruised kind of shame. "I used to think love was supposed to feel safe," she whispered, "but it always feels like a test I keep failing." Nathaniel's gaze dropped to her hands, resting on the table now, fingers interlaced. He noticed the faint calluses, the rougher skin at the edges of her knuckles. The hands of someone who had worked, carried, lifted, held on. "You have strong hands," he said softly. Emily looked at him, confused. "I mean that in a good way," he added quickly, almost shyly. "I've spent my life in boardrooms and contracts. I admire people who've built something with their own hands. People who keep going, even when no one's watching." She was silent for a moment, eyes slightly wide. No one had ever looked at her like that before. Not like she was something to be proud of. Then Nathaniel said, "I think people who've hurt the most know better than anyone what happiness really means. And maybe that's why you'll find it someday, in a way that others never could." Emily's throat tightened, her eyes shimmered, and she blinked quickly, looking down. Without a word, Nathaniel reached for the napkin beside his plate, folded it gently, and placed it beside her water glass, close, but not pushing it into her hands. Then he turned his gaze away, giving her space. That small gesture, his restraint, his awareness, it undid her more than any hug could have. By the time dessert came, the tension between them had shifted. It wasn't romantic yet, but it was warm, safe, a space she hadn't felt in a long time. When they stepped back outside into the cool night air, Nathaniel didn't ask for her number. Instead, he said, "If this evening wasn't too terrible, I'd like to see you again. Not by accident." Emily met his eyes. "It wasn't terrible," she said, then added, "Maybe even nice." He smiled. "Then maybe next time," he said gently. "We'll skip the cafe disasters and start with dinner." The next morning, Emily was restocking the pastry case when she heard the soft chime of the front door. She barely glanced up, just another customer. But when she looked again, her breath caught. Nathaniel. He stood at the end of the line, dressed in dark jeans and a button-up with rolled sleeves. He kept his head slightly down, reading the menu as if it were his first time there. When it was his turn, he simply said, "1 latte, please." Emily made it without thinking, heart tapping faster. At the pickup counter, he took the cup. "More cinnamon today," he said, smiling. "Still perfect." He slipped a 50 into the tip jar and walked out without another word. Emily stared after him. She didn't know whether to laugh or roll her eyes, but she knew one thing: she wasn't imagining this. The visits became routine. Each morning, Nathaniel came in. Sometimes he stayed with his laptop at the corner table. Other times he just grabbed his drink and nodded at her. He never lingered too long. Never asked anything of her. But his presence lingered like a soft thread woven into her day. Then one morning, he placed a thick book on the counter. Emily read the title, Interior Design Fundamentals. "I didn't get far," he admitted, tapping the cover. "But I marked a few pages. Thought they might mean something to you." Emily ran her fingers over the spine. It wasn't new. Clearly cherished. That touched her more than she showed. A few days later, during a lull, she shared something she hadn't voiced aloud in years. "I want to open a small studio someday," she confessed. "Nothing fancy. Just a place for people like us, the ones who can't afford big design firms." Nathaniel just nodded, listening. No advice, no pity, just quiet understanding. The next morning, a manila folder waited for her behind the counter. Inside, a hand-drawn blueprint. A studio, her studio, imperfect but clearly imagined. Rooms labeled. Tiny potted plants sketched in the windows. A note was clipped to the top: "I can't draw, but maybe this helps." Emily stared at it for a long time. Not romantic, not yet, but safe, sincere, seen. She started to notice the little things. How he always let others go first in line. How he once wiped a spill at a nearby table without a word. How he remembered when the barista next to her had a chemistry final and asked her how it went days later. Nathaniel didn't just hear people. He saw them. He saw her. One crisp morning, her mother came into the cafe. Cheeks rosy from the cold, cane in hand, she came bearing scones. As she sat down, her leg gave out a bit. Nathaniel was there in a blink, steadying her gently. "Mrs. Hughes," he said, "careful. That curb is tricky." Emily turned sharply. "You know her name?" He smiled softly. "She had a limp the night we met. I asked around and had someone drop off her medication anonymously. Hope that was okay." Emily felt her throat tighten. She had never told him her mom's name, or about the limp, or the pills. He had been caring from the shadows. That evening, they walked through the park together. The leaves turned gold, the air sharp with early fall. Nathaniel kept his hands in his pockets, his voice low. "I never thought I'd feel this again," he said. "After losing so much, I thought I'd close that part of myself." He looked at her, eyes steady. "But maybe, if we're both trying, we can start by trusting." Emily didn't answer right away. But as they walked, her fingers brushed his. She let them stay. And then, deliberately, gently, she reached out and laced them with his. Her first step forward. And he didn't let go. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Emily had been invited to visit one of Nathaniel's newest commercial properties, a renovated art and design showroom that his company had recently opened to the public. He had casually mentioned she might enjoy the space. "Some of the design elements might inspire you," he'd said with a smile. She arrived alone, umbrella in hand, mist clinging to her coat as she stepped inside. The space was stunning, open concept, high ceilings, modern lighting, and walls lined with architectural models, mood boards, and framed photos of past projects. It felt like walking into someone's creative mind. Then, at the far end of the gallery, she saw it. A photograph, large, beautifully framed, placed just above a display of Nathaniel's earlier work. It wasn't labeled, but it didn't need to be. The woman in the image stood beside Nathaniel, hand on his arm, her smile soft and graceful. She was dressed in pale blue, her blonde hair falling in natural waves, and her eyes, gentle, kind. Emily froze. The resemblance was undeniable. The curve of the jaw, the softness in her expression, even the way she held herself. It was like looking at an older version of herself. Her heart clenched painfully. She turned away, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. That evening, she met Nathaniel for dinner, but the warmth from previous nights was missing. She was quiet, distant, distracted. Nathaniel noticed. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. Emily didn't answer right away. She stirred her tea, watching the steam rise like smoke from a fire she couldn't put out. Finally, she looked up and said flatly, "I saw the photo in the gallery today." Nathaniel blinked. "Photo?" "The one of you and your wife," she said. "Or your ex-wife." Her voice faltered slightly. "She looks like me." There was no accusation in her tone, just quiet devastation. Nathaniel's face shifted, slowly. "She wasn't my ex-wife," he said. "She was my wife. She passed away 5 years ago." Emily's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. Nathaniel leaned back slightly, hands folding in front of him. Her name was Claire. "I see," Emily whispered. Then, after a pause, "Is that why you've been helping me? Because I remind you of her?" Nathaniel looked away for a moment, the air between them growing dense. "I didn't help you because you reminded me of her," he said finally. "I didn't even notice it at first. But yes, after a while, I saw it too." Emily swallowed hard. He continued, his voice lower now. "But I didn't stay because of that. I stayed because when I'm around you, I feel like I'm finally breathing again. like I'm not just existing to fill a calendar. He looked directly at her, voice steady. You don't remind me of Claire. You make me feel something I thought I had lost forever. Emily wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the way he looked at her, the truth in his tone. But the doubt had already taken root. She looked down at her hands, the same hands he'd once called strong, and whispered, I can't be a shadow. I can't be someone's second chapter just because I look like the first. Nathaniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. The weight of grief hung between them, his past, her fear, the echoes of someone gone. I need time, she said softly. He nodded, eyes downcast. I understand. The next day, Emily stopped replying to his texts. A week later, she blocked his number. She told herself it was the right thing to do, to protect her heart before it became a replacement. But even as she sat alone in her apartment, staring at the unfinished sketch of her dream studio, she couldn't stop wondering if, maybe, she'd walked away from something real. Just when it had started to feel like hers. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and quiet dread. Emily sat in the waiting area, her hands buried in her coat pockets, eyes glassy as she stared at the pale green tiles on the floor. Her mother had collapsed earlier that morning. The doctors suspected complications from her previous condition, complications that would require immediate surgery. Emily had already called every clinic, every loan office, every possible lifeline. Her savings were gone. Her part-time income wasn't enough. Medicaid would take too long. The hospital had handed her a clipboard and a number she didn't want to read twice. She was about to break. Again. Then a nurse walked over. Miss Hughes? She said, gently. Emily looked up, bracing herself. The expenses for your mother's procedure, the nurse continued. They've already been covered. Full payment. Anonymously. Emily blinked. What? The nurse smiled kindly. You have someone looking out for you. She handed Emily a folded note. It was tucked inside the breast pocket of her coat, placed there quietly while she wasn't looking. With trembling fingers, Emily opened the letter. The handwriting was steady, familiar. Not everyone gets a chance to make things right. Thank you for walking into my life, even if it was only for a few weeks. N. Tears welled instantly. This wasn't charity. It wasn't guilt. It was something deeper, a gesture that came from knowing exactly how to love someone when they were too tired to keep standing. Emily didn't stop to think. She ran. Out the hospital doors, into the rain. The sky opened above her, soaking through her coat within seconds, but she didn't care. Her boots splashed through puddles, cars honked, someone shouted behind her, but none of it registered. When she turned the corner onto the street outside her building, she saw him. Nathaniel stood at the curb, completely drenched. His jacket clung to his frame, hair dripping, water running down his face in quiet rivulets. He wasn't under a roof, wasn't checking his phone, wasn't doing anything but waiting. When he saw her, his eyes didn't widen. He didn't rush forward. He just breathed. Emily didn't slow down. She reached him in 3 strides and threw her arms around him. He caught her. Her sobs came immediately, messy, full-bodied, desperate. They stood there in the middle of the storm, wrapped in each other, like gravity had finally given up trying to keep them apart. I'm sorry, she whispered into his chest. I was scared. I didn't know if I was real to you or just... He pulled back, just enough to look her in the eyes. You were real, he said. You still are. And I was the coward. She opened her mouth to respond, but he was already moving. Nathaniel sank to one knee on the wet pavement, raindrops splashing against the velvet box he pulled from his coat pocket. He opened it, revealing a simple but elegant ring. No frills, just a soft gleam and steady promise. I was wrong to walk away without fighting for you, he said, voice steady despite the tremble in his hands. But if you say yes, I will never stop choosing you. Not just today. Every day after. Emily gasped, rainwater and tears blurring everything, but his face remained crystal clear. She laughed through a sob. You're soaked. So are you. Do you still think I'm not worth loving? She asked, breathless. Nathaniel shook his head slowly. No, he said. You're the reason I remembered how to. She nodded, her lips quivering, and knelt down to match him in the rain. Yes, she whispered, yes. And then there was no more space between them. 6 months after that rainy night, Emily stood at the edge of a sun-drenched garden, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. The spring breeze lifted the hem of her white dress, the one she had designed herself. Simple, elegant, unmistakably hers. Her mother, healthier now, walked proudly beside her, their arms linked. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she wore a smile. The aisle was lined with familiar faces, friends, cafe regulars, hospital staff, students, people who had quietly become part of their journey. At the end of the aisle stood Nathaniel. He wore a light gray suit, just like the first time she saw him, but now his presence carried no weight, only peace. When Emily reached him, he gently took her hands. Their eyes locked, the world fading around them. I don't promise perfection, she said softly, but I promise presence, even when it's hard. His voice cracked slightly. Not just today, but every day from now. I'll choose you again. He pulled her into an embrace as guests looked on, not cheering, but smiling, as if witnessing something quietly holy. 1 year later, Emily and Nathaniel moved into a modest house on the city's edge. Not a mansion, not a penthouse. Just the house Emily had once dreamed of. Yellow door, flower boxes, an attic transformed into her design studio. Above its entrance, a hand-carved sign, Emily's Light. She offered free weekend design classes to teens from working-class neighborhoods, teaching them to express themselves through color, shape, and story. The studio was supported by the Kindness and Love Foundation.